All right, welcome to the Lost Confederacy YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to dissecting the acronym ADOS, which stands for American Descendants of Slavery. And what we're going to be doing is breaking this down, most importantly, the first letter of the acronym, which is American. And this channel is dedicated to reading lawful documents, treaties, acts, things of that nature, to show the so-called Black or Afro-American, colored, Negro, whatever reclassification that you use, that you are the American and you also are a prisoner of war. What we think is racism is actually military occupation by Europeans. And so we have Chief Quietwater. If you can raise your hand and let everybody know who Chief Quietwater is. We have Chief Biko. You can raise your hand, acknowledge who you are. And myself, I'm Chief Alligator. So we'll start this off before we get into our literature that we will read before every meeting. We'll have the chiefs talk a little bit about why we decided to come together and present this information to the world. One timestamp, today is July 4th, 2021. So we do want to timestamp this so that we'll know exactly what date it is and what year, and we'll be doing this once a week. So Chief Quietwater, tell us a little bit about why you decided to participate in telling the world that we are the American and that we may or may not be prisoners of war.
I want to start off by saying that this has definitely been an eye-opener for me and my children. And the reason why I wanted to partake in the weekly meetings is because it's information that, number one, I did not know. Number two is information that is 100% needed, especially if you do have children, and it gives a basis of where we could at least start to learn who we are and tie us back to the land. So basically, that was my reasoning for wanting to explore all of this information that we're learning and coming together and learning with you guys.
Okay, Chief Biko, you want to share what motivated you to be of service?
Sure. First and foremost, it gives us a tie to this land, to this continent. I know we've seen pretty much every video there is from the Europeans saying, go back to your homeland, Africa, Jamaica, any of the African diaspora. But this here is something that roots us to this land, so it makes it that more important to fight for. This information that is going to be given to you all is important in that not only roots us to this land, but it also is fact-based. Like, nothing is pretty much opinion-based. We're not saying what we think, we're pretty much saying what we know. And we're going to be displaying that for you all. That way we can finally have that basis of, as Chief Quietwater said, something to pretty much start from, that foundation, because it's needed.
All right, and myself, I kind of echo everybody's opinions as well. For me, it was about teaching my son about history and started realizing that it's all negative as far as the slave narrative that's always portrayed about our people. Every group of people have a dark side. And so I started on a journey of finding out there's got to be a positive, and come to find out there's just a wealth of our history right here on this land. And so, yeah, there's going to be a lot of unhappy groups, you know, with this information. Native Americans, those what they call civilized tribes. Yeah, we're going to have some questions for you because based on the research that we found out, we are blood and we are related. And we'll get into that. Europeans, you're living lies. You're not American. You're US citizens. And so this whole thing just needs to just be told up front. We got people jumping off boats, getting pieces of paper claiming to be American, and they're dishonoring their bloodline. Last time I checked, who you are is based on your bloodline. And we got a lot of people running around claiming to be American when they're otherwise. So I look forward to this. Let's get into it. Every meeting, we're going to read the 12 steps of recovery for the American that descended from slavery. We're going to read legal definitions. We're going to read a quote from Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who is the American that was a chief founder in what we know now as Black History Month. And we also read the 5 historical maroon points, which were free Americans in that Creek Confederacy area, more specifically in the Florida and what we know now as Georgia area. So with that being said, Chief Quietwater, you want to start with the steps?
I'm going to be reading the 13-week practical program of action for each American descendant of slavery. Number 1, learn about the estate or estates your family originated from. Number 2, establish who established that estate. Number 3, what nation and confederacy had jurisdiction over that area prior to the European. Number 4, ask all nonprofit organizations you attend that what's your position on reparations. Number 5, they either support it or they don't. No support, no money. However, if they support it, then immediately children and adults need weekly classes free of charge about steps 1, 2, and 3, and field trips to ADOS landmarks in that city, county, and state. Number 6, don't support European holidays for the remainder of the 13-week time frame. Number 7, avoid spending money with any small business that does not hire your people, like gas stations, nail salons, subways. Number 8, all businesses need operating cash. Spend money with American Black businesses. Number 9, all other groups rely on our energy and operating cash to survive. Set the trends of making other groups follow our lead and support our clubs, services, products, and entertainment. Number 10, the US government is bankrupt. The Federal Reserve prints money, i.e. quantitative easing. It also burns money, i.e. quantitative tightening. The US dollar hasn't been backed by gold since Richard Nixon in 1971, the Gold Standard Act. The government operates off full faith of its citizens to pay debt and taxes. American descendants of slavery no longer have faith in the US government. This is why financial support will be altered, stopped, and redirected. Number 11, teach your kids 1 hour a day about their history on this land. A, have them learn about an American inventor. B, have them know about our heroes. C, they should know the European conquered the estate you live in. D, they should know the nation of people prior to European invasion militarily and culturally. And 12, practicing these steps will educate us on the land we're claiming America and attaches us to the history and laws of the US government. Every estate American descendants of slavery live in should have steps 1, 2, and 3 advertised via social media, radio, and newspaper. This in 13 weeks, 1 fiscal quarter will bring us together for our common cause.
Hey, and myself, Chief Alligator, I am going to read the legal definitions and the Dr. Carter G. Woodson quote. So I am going to share my screen. Let's see. All right. So legal definitions. Definition 1, an American, a native of America. Second definition, descendants, one who follows in the bloodline of an ancestor, either lineally or collaterally. Third legal definition, slavery, a situation in which one person has absolute power over the life, fortune, and liberty of another. Fourth legal definition, prisoner of war, a person, usually a soldier, who is captured by or surrenders to the enemy in wartime. Fifth legal definition, school, any institution at which instruction is given in a particular discipline. And the sixth legal definition, education, an enlightening experience. The Dr. Carter G. Woodson quote I'm going to choose today. I'm going to start with number 1. Philosophers have long conceded, however, that every man has 2 educators, that which is given him, and the other that which he gives himself. Of the 2 kinds, the latter is by far more desirable. And so at this point, we'll have Chief Biko. He's going to do the inventor and the maroon points.
All right, Chief Biko here. The maroon historical points, I'll go ahead and start with those. Number 1, was a person escaping slavery seeking freedom or breaking the law? Number 2, providing unity and a strong defense came first. Number 3, maroon leaders were first and foremost military figures. Number 4, maroons established guerrilla warfare, planting sharp sticks in thick grass. Number 5, maroons knew their European enemies' language, defenses, and plans. This week, who we have for our American inventor. American inventor will be Mary Van Britton Brown. She's the inventor of the closed circuit TV security system, better known as the home security system, born October 30th, 1922. Brown, she also worked as a nurse and inventor, created the system along with her husband, Albert Brown. They both jointly filed for the patent on August 1st of 1966. And the application was granted on December 2nd, 1969. That patent number is patent number US 3482037A. And that is Mary Van Britton Brown.
Okay. I have one question, Chief Biko, about Mary Van Britton Brown. So she created the home video security system, correct?
Correct.
Do Americans, aka also known as Black, Negro, Colored, or Afro-American, do they control that industry from a business standpoint?
Not at all.
Okay. So for the record, somebody from our lineage created the home video security, but we do not control the business sector, correct?
Correct that, and we do not reap the benefits as a collective from it.
All right, Chief Quietwater, would you like to go first in dissecting steps 1, 2, and 3?
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, actually 1, 2, and 3, as far as your lineage is concerned.
Yes, I can. So my paternal lineage from my father comes from Alabama. The European that established the estate is Hernando de Soto. He basically established Alabama. The native people were actually the Alabama people. The language that was spoken was Alabama. Alabama. It was just spelt different, which is Albaamaha. The Confederacy is the Muskogee Creek Confederacy. And my maternal lineage is from Tennessee. Again, Hernando de Soto. The native people there were the Muskogee, Yuchi, Creek, Choctaw, and Chickasaw. And the language that was spoken is Muskogean. The Confederacy was the Western Indian Confederacy.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Do you have any questions first, Chief Biko, you'd like to ask?
Nah, not at this time. Not at this time.
Okay, I'm actually trying to pull up a map. Let's see here. Y'all bear with me 1 second. And so what did you take from that, Chief Quietwater, that information that you pulled up about your bloodline as far as Alabama is concerned?
As far as Alabama, the same person actually basically discovered or established rather Alabama and Tennessee. Um, in Alabama, the native people actually were the Alabama people. And I did not know that, that was actually the native people, and hence the actual state is named after the native people that was there. But of course, that's not taught, or just not information that they promote, to give people a sense of where they come from. So that's one thing that I took from the Alabama. In regards to the Tennessee lineage, the native people, it was a lot more, there were more tribes, the Muskogee, Uchee Creek, Choctaw, and Chickasaw. So they basically, there was more than one group of people that were native to the Tennessee part of the land.
Okay. And I'm going to share this screen real quick just so we can get a better understanding of what you're saying. So basically, we can see on this map. So we have England here, we have France here, and we have Spain here. And so what you're basically saying is someone from Europe who spoke the language of Spanish left this landmass
Mm-hmm.
and actually came to this landmass, which is America.
Correct. Correct.
They established a state known as Alabama, but based on what you've learned, Alabama is an American name, correct?
Correct.
So
Yes.
the area
Correct.
was already
Native
called,
land.
okay. So
Right.
that area was already called Alabama, and there are
Alabama.
Americans that had a nation
Mm-hmm.
known as what? Alabama, or was it Muskogee? Which one did you share?
The Confederacy was the Muskogee Creek,
Okay.
and yeah,
And so the nation of people were Alabama.
correct.
Okay.
Spelled a little different, but same Alabama, just spelled different.
Okay. So what we have here is we have a group of people that came from another landmass, which would be Europe, and they left Europe, came to America, and they basically military occupied an area of land, but they did not rename the land. They kept that
Right.
name of they used the same name that the Americans use.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that we're doing in this 12 steps of recovery, we all have to realize if you classify yourself as Black, Negro, Afro-American, colored, or people of color, etc., whatever adjective you choose to use, you're mentally sick because you don't know your basic world geography, right? The idea that people here are American,
Mm-hmm.
people here on this landmass are American.
Right.
People from France, Spain, England, they're from a different landmass. So how in 2021 do we have people from a different landmass claiming to be American?
Right.
This is what makes us crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And we all need mental health because through the school system, you've been schooled into believing that people that came across this Atlantic are now people that are originally from here. Makes no sense. It's retarded.
No logic.
All right. So Chief Biko, do you want to get into your piece? I'm gonna stop sharing this. Does anybody else want to build on this while we're here? You did mention Confederacy, and that's one thing that I'll add, and then somebody else can build on. So the way that our ancestors operated government on this land is a group of tribes organized would make a nation. A group of nations organized would make a confederacy. And so when you hear her say the Creek Confederacy is the southeast region of North America. So that's going to comprise of what we know as the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. Pretty much everything east of the Mississippi River in the southeast corridor of North America. All right. So I just wanted to throw that in there because a lot of times when quote unquote Black people hear the word Confederacy, we think rebel flag and we think rednecks. And in reality, we're going to show based on American historical fact that they're lying and they actually have taken our American culture and thrown it in our face. Anybody else want to build on that?
I'll go ahead and piggyback off of that. Pretty much basically from the two land masses that you showed, we know through history that they were underneath a pretty much a monarchy. They had no democracy as far as joint nations coming together to, establish the law of the land. That was something that was pretty much, that is native to America. So for us to even realize and think that somebody who's coming from a monarchy system will come to a new landmass and create a new government without having the knowledge of a pre-existing government, that's impossible. They weren't going to just come up off the top of the head and say, okay, let's make a confederacy without first having knowledge of said confederacy. So that's where we're trying to paint the picture of that Confederacy is something native to America, something native to the actual Americans. Thus, that is an American establishment. Because no way can a person from a monarchy system in Europe come over and create something that's already been existing on this land prior to the European.
Good point.
You want to add on Quiet Water?
No, I agree with everything that he said, basically.
Okay. If we look at this map real quick, we can just kind of see how you see the word Lower Creeks here. And so Creek is one of the nations that makes up the Creek Confederacy. I guess we can just throw in, just for the people who don't know, for a reference point, what we know now is the 5 civilized tribes, which are actually nations. Those nations were also a part of this Creek Confederacy. So Creeks were one, Choctaw was one, Chickasaw was another, Seminole, and Cherokee. And so we're going to learn about how this Confederacy fell and why it's known in 2021 as the Dirty South. Why were they so harsh against the Americans that lost their form of government and lost their land down here? And we'll find out it's the greatest American story that's never been told. So with that being said, Chief Pico, I'm going to go ahead and let you do your presentation.
All right. Go ahead and share my screen. All right, can everyone see? Okay, so basically my family lineage, both sides, my paternal as well as maternal, both came from South Carolina or come from South Carolina. The 2 counties, which are pretty much here that I have, is a map of South Carolina today. And it has it broken down into the counties as well as the original Native American territories. Both my mother and father, both sides either come, well, my mother's side comes from Lawrence, father's side come from Aiken. As you can see here, the Lawrence, that actual tribe would be the Eno-Shikori, and the actual paternal side would come from the Westo Native Americans. Pretty much the Westo Americans, their native language was Yuchi, also known as Uchian, closely related to the Sioux language. The Confederacy was the Creek Confederacy or the Muskogee, as well as the Eno-Shikori. This would be my maternal side. Their native language was the Sioux. So we're seeing a commonality here between the Westo Americans as well as Eno-Shikori, of them having like a common language. Confederacy was both the same, the Creek Confederacy. And one fun fact here is that the Eno-Shikori actually merged into the Catawba Catawba Nation at the end of the Yamasee War. And that nation pretty much was also included into the Creek Confederacy. The established, or who established the estate, was King Charles. Actually chartered 8 lord proprietors to establish the colony known as Carolina. This would include both North and South Carolina at the time. Carolina was named after the king, pretty much King Charles. But pretty much it was established 1663, and that it was both combining North and South Carolina at the time.
Okay, question on King Charles. So King Charles, he's from the United Kingdom. We're in Europe. He's probably from the United Kingdom, correct?
Correct. Actually, it was pretty much England. So British United Kingdom can be pretty much almost interchangeable. But he actually sent these British noblemen, which would be the lord proprietors, over to Carolina to establish that land. So this would be somebody from England.
Okay. And the Yamasee War that I see you reference here,
Mhm.
what happened in that war? Because basically what you're saying is, well, let me ask the question correct. In order for there to be a war, that means that the Americans that were on this land, they had a military, correct?
Correct.
And so the Americans were fighting the Europeans to try to continue to occupy their native land, correct?
Correct. Correct.
What do you know about the Yamasee War? What happened in that war? Or how did that end up? What happened at the end of that war? Or what do you know about it? Just a little bit.
At the end of the war, there was a treaty signed. The war only lasted for about 3 years, showing here from 1715 to 1718. Was basically what we'll see throughout, this through these YouTube videos is pretty much the same thing. The European making their way into actual Native Americans' land, pretty much imposing their culture onto them, and pretty much doing whatever they want to the actual Americans' land. Americans, having it up to here and fighting back. We'll see that as a recurring theme as we progress through these weeks. But pretty much started April 15, 1715. Yamasee set off a raid on British settlement trading ports. So a lot of they were in business, but when you do bad business with certain people, they like to take advantage of you. The Americans weren't having it, and that's what pretty much kicked off the war. They went ahead and raided a trading post. As you can see here on this map, Yamasee is close to the Atlantic Ocean. So pretty much this is where they raided that trading port where the European was sending over different goods. Once that happened, again, they went to war for 3 years. And at the end of it, let me see what I have here. Bear with me for a moment. At the end of it, they kind of pretty much resettled into what would be known as Savannah area. And then of course eventually end up migrating towards the territory known as Florida.
Okay. So basically, the more the Europeans started to military occupy what we now know as the Carolinas, American nations were disintegrating and collapsing as well. And so then the people of the native people of this area, they started scattering, and a lot of them started going further south.
Correct. They started to scatter. They started to actually join together, which was one of the points here, that they merged. The Shikari merged with the Catawba Nation, which you can see is kind of here. And it pretty much was relatives anyway, neighbors. They merged with the nation at the end of the war. So a lot of the tribes had become disbanded, or a lot of them were just weakened to a point where they had to join with each other. And that is also something that you'll see within the Creek Confederacy, a lot of these nations coming together to prevent full European invasion.
Chief Whitewater, you got any questions for Chief Biko?
No. No. Pretty clear.
All right, so this is a map of South Carolina, correct?
Correct. Both of these were maps of South Carolina. This one here that I'm showing now is more so of the larger tribes.
Okay.
Do you know when South and North Carolina split? When did they become two separate?
I believe it wasn't too long. I don't have that right off the top,
Okay.
but I can definitely go ahead and get that.
And this is interesting when you're talking about recovering or restoring your American history back to yourself. I'm looking, I see Cherokee is in the upper west corner.
Mhm.
Catawba, Waxhaw, Cheraw. So we have all these different nations, right?
Mhm.
And out of all of these nations, if we look at 2021 today, the only one that's still being recognized or remembered on a quote unquote large scale would be the Cherokee.
Mhm.
All these other nations of people, okay, so what happened, right?
Exactly. And I even piggyback off of that, a lot of these same tribes and nations that we see on this map were also in North Carolina area as well. Again, this was one large Carolina before they actually made a distinction between North and South. But a lot of these same tribes were located in the North Carolina territory as well.
And so what you're really saying is the Americans were organized. Of course, they were doing trade with the world prior to the European coming over. I believe, who was the European? Okay, right. He came from the United Kingdom. So before someone came from England and decided to military occupy the Yamasee port, I think what we have to start understanding as Americans is we were already doing business in and out of the ports.
Correct.
Right.
And
A
so
lot of the
go ahead.
I was gonna say a lot of the tribes went ahead and set up, their cities, their towns on these waterways. You've never heard any civilization that didn't start near water. It's a necessity.
Right.
That's how you pretty much trade with people. That's how you get around. So when they say like savage, that's not a savage mindset. Even animals know to set up their homes, wherever you want to call it, near waterways.
Right.
So there was nothing savage about our people. So that's something that I also want to stress.
Very well organized.
Absolutely. Great presentation. Let's see. I'm going to do Georgia. Let me see. Let me get this right. Let's get this going. Okay. So all right. So I'm going to share my screen. And this is actually an archive from a museum out of the city of Savannah, which is the first capital of what we now know as the estate of Georgia. And it's also the oldest city from a European standpoint when it comes to the estate of Georgia. So James Edward Oglethorpe and 114 colonists arrived on the future site of Savannah, the first city in the colony of Georgia. Oglethorpe negotiates a treaty with the leader of the local Yamacraw people, Tamachichi, and then lays out the city on a grid plan with squares 60 by 60 tithing lots and 60 by 90 trust lots arranged into wards. The trustees originally banned slavery, hard liquor, Catholics, and lawyers from the colony. Although enslaved people were brought from Charleston to help clear the land and construct the city, that was in 1733. So there's a lot that I can pull out of this. So first and foremost, from a European standpoint, their history starts in now what we know as Georgia. James Oglethorpe is the actual, he's the one that went in the treaty with the Yamakra, who are the Americans, okay? And what, this is 2021, there's an Oglethorpe University right here in Atlanta. Now you understand why he's reverenced throughout the state of Georgia, because he establishes Georgia. Georgia is also named after King George. So let's see. So here we are here. So it looks like the Carolinas were established, right, from the people coming out of England, as well as the estate known as Georgia. So King George is going to be out of England. He sends James Oglethorpe from this landmass to this landmass. And what we know as Savannah is going to be right in here, right? And the way that they decided to set this city up, which still applies today, is into wards, right? So that means that New Orleans and Savannah are going to look geographically the same because they're wards. It's the way that they set up the tithing lots and the trust lots. When I think of tithing, the first thing I think of is religious, right? And so we can see that half of this military occupation, or a portion of the military occupation, it was going to be 60 by 60 tithing lots. So that's going to be a way for their clergy, right, to reap benefits. And then we also see trust lots, right? And so when we use the word estate in our steps, find out the estate that your family comes from, it's because these states are estates. You don't have trustees unless there's an estate. So you see, it says the trustees originally banned slavery, hard liquor, Catholics, and lawyers from the colony, right? And all of this, of course, happened in 1733. If we come down to 1751, we can see the Board of Trustees who governed the colony from England legally permitted slave ownership in Georgia. So there's no doubt that we're living in trust, which is why you don't own anything in 2021, as of July 4th that we're making this video. You always have to pay tax on anything that you possess, right? Your car, your house. And so this is why, once military occupation started, they set these trusts up, right? And so we get the benefit of using things during our natural life. However, they're military occupying the land, so you're not really owning anything. That's what I would take from this. Let me get a little bit deeper. So James Oglethorpe established the estate of Georgia on behalf of King George. The native people to the land are going to be the Appalachian, the Cherokee, the Hitchiti, the Oconee, the Muskogee, and the Muskogee, the Timucua, the Yamasee, and the Gwali. The native language was Iroquoian, and Iroquoian is that's important because the Iroquois Confederacy is going to be the Iroquois Confederacy is going to be what is in the northeast region of North America, right? So when those first pilgrims came and settled in that Virginia area, so your Iroquois Confederacy is what collapsed here. And the southeast region is going to be the Creek Confederacy. So it's interesting that the people in this area, now known under military occupation as Georgia, that their language was Iroquoian. Let's see. And the Confederacy was the Creek Confederacy, same as same as Chief Biko, and same as Chief Quietwater. I don't know why I'm thinking Michael Jordan right now. Maybe because we, and so we can see the Creek Confederacy is going to be the southeast region of North America right here. I do have something to show. So this is actually in Savannah, and I'll just show a little bit of this. And so this is actually, you can actually go to a museum in Savannah if you want to see how the prisoners of war lived. When we use the word slave, no human being can be a slave.
And it's being recorded.
And so if you look at the ceiling of this room, what the prisoners of war would do in the city of Savannah is they would paint it this blue color, and that was to send them a signal, right? So everything was in code, right? And this is where your house Negroes or your house prisoners of war, I'm showing you how they would live. And so you see they had a bed, fireplace, right? And so, I mean, they live pretty modest. Think about it. If you're going to have somebody actually working for you, you know, you're not going to treat them as they like to say through TV and through erroneous literature, like people were living like dogs. I mean, think about it. You want the people to work for you. So we can see the living quarters were not as we would think they would be for a prisoner of war. So you can see the bed situation here. So decent living quarter area for your quote unquote house Negroes or your prisoners of war that actually lived on the property. Now this room is going to be, they would have to walk through a field in order to get to what we would call the big house or the actual master's house or owner's house. And you can see that color blue a lot clearer on this image. And so this was a signal on the Underground Railroad within the city of Atlanta. And that'll be a theme throughout the Southeast region of North America. Prisoners of war were escaping military occupation on a code system. And so we'll back out of that. And that's pretty much it for the state of Georgia. I can show some images of so this is actually the location. This is actually where your prisoners of war would live in this building right here. So you see there's a lot of different rooms here for a lot of prisoners of war. They could house a lot of, this is where your house Negro, the people who worked in the big house, this is where they live. And so this idea, one of the things that I would add on to this is we have this idea from the movies, which is not real, right? Just like Roots and all these other movies. We have this idea that the plantation was in the middle of nowhere and these prisoners of war just lived in shacks. Well, here we can see that this is not the reality, right? Most of the time, the owners or the masters, if you will, they did not live on their plantation. They lived within the city, okay? Because this person here, the Owens person, he was actually a politician for the state of Georgia. And so that field plantation was a separate operation from the actual headquarters. His headquarters or his living, where his family lived, where he lived, was actually in the city.
That's where you get the house Negro term, because they managed that actual establishment basically. And the house Negro was the one who actually let the field people know different things, right? When it came to secret stuff that the field people would otherwise not know, the house Negro was the one who would relay information to the field slaves.
Correct. And so just to go through a couple of these images. So now we're inside the house of where the actual owner lived. So you can see the difference from the prisoner of war living quarters to the actual, what we would call the big house, right? And so you can see the finest of wood furniture, the living quarters, and this is how they were living in the 17 and 1800s, right? So we can see a huge difference here from the way the prisoners of war lived versus this gentleman right here who's on that picture, Owens.
Chief Alligator, want to just jump in real quick because you made a great point of the distinction between pretty much, I guess, to put it in layman's terms and make it easier to understand, like the factory workers versus the corporate office. Like you said, the headquarters. They're not going to be in that same vicinity. You're going to have your factory off in a certain area. You have people that manage that area. Then you're going to have corporate headquarters, which you can still have their house Negroes who pretty much are taking the calls, anything that the master or owner would say. So I think you made a great point of, distinguishing the two and showing how they were one and the same, but both in separate locations. Because I think that's important for us as a people to understand, because you can say, why didn't they just go to the master house and kill them if they're on the land? I'm pretty sure a lot of them did that. But if you're in a totally different area from where the work is being tilled, it makes it a little bit more difficult.
Great, yeah, great build, Chief Pico. And just to add on, if you ever visit Savannah and take the historical tour and your third eye is open and you're aware that you are the American, you start to understand that the city of Savannah is like a big human trafficking city, right? They even have in the sidewalks doors that would open up that they would put humans in, right? But I want to just throw this in, going back to the Underground Railroad. So we know now that the prisoners of war that lived in the house, that were called house Negroes, these would be the first people to also learn English. Okay, so we have to remember our people were speaking Iroquoian in this land area when they started military developing what we now know as Savannah. And so those house Negroes are the first ones to become bilingual. And so when they would find out that prisoners of war were going to be sold off, or such and such family was about to be broken up, what we did was the house Negro, because you could see the other house Negroes out here in the field, right? They may be trimming the bushes on the actual owner's property. And what they would do, let me go here real quick. This is still all in the house, but I want to show y'all something real quick. Boom. So these are signs that we all knew as prisoners of war. And so what would happen is the house Negroes, they would knit certain quilts with these designs on them. And they would hang them out the window that I just showed y'all. And that would relay the message to the people outside the house, right? They knew how to decode these signs and say, okay, such and such family is about to get sold. We need to help them escape from the area. And of course, run to what we now know as Florida. Contrary to popular belief, the Underground Railroad predominantly ran to Florida because that was free land, and it was also the Seminole Nation, which we'll get into those wars a little later on. Let me go back. So any other questions about where we are right now? And I'm gonna show a couple of more images of the actual.
I was going to say, Chief Alligator, can you talk about why Georgia was established and who actually was brought over here? I think that's a needed point for us to understand.
Okay, great reminder. And so King George from here sent James Oglethorpe and his men to come over and contract with the chief Tamahachi, right? And they wanted to set up a port, of course. right? See the theme between the Carolinas establishing a port in the Yamasee area. They wanted to establish a port here in Savannah. But more importantly, Georgia is the 13th colony. And let's see, where can I go to? Bear with me 1 second. I'm trying to pull this up. Georgia was the 13th colony, and this colony was strategically started as a military buffer state. And the military tactic was, as Chief Biko mentioned earlier, as the Yamasee War was going on and the nations within now what we know as North Carolina, South Carolina, as they were collapsing due to the wars being brought by the Europeans, people were scattering. Georgia was established to prevent people from the Carolina area running into Seminole Nation territory. All right, so this, the only reason that the colony of Georgia was established, it was a military buffer state. Basically, it was to cut off the Americans as these nations were collapsing. They didn't want them running south. They actually wanted them going west, and we're going to find out why. As we continue to go through American history, you can see real quick right here, this is the Mississippi River, and we can see how that river pretty much runs from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up into what we know now as Canada, but it's still America. What was the other question, Chief Biko, that you wanted me to build on with that?
And also who was sent as far as people to kind of, I guess, not only military occupied, but also colonize it as well. Like the types of people.
Gotcha. And so King George, what he did in order to populate the colony of Georgia, great reminder, what he did was he emptied his homeless off the streets. He emptied his debtor prisons, and he emptied his criminal prisons. And so what England basically did is they dumped their trash in Georgia. Okay, they sent their peasantry over, they sent their criminals over, and that's the European that populated the estate, or at first the 13th colony of Georgia. They sent their thugs over. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to learn a common theme when we learn about the dirty South, and we start hearing in the 20th century, the 1900s, about the hangings and the burnings and just the low down behavior that happens to Americans in the collapse of the Creek Confederacy in the southeast region of North America. What we have to understand as Americans is look who they descend from, right? Right, what our people like to call rednecks or racists. No, they're really, their grandparents, were fresh out of prison from Europe, or fresh off the streets from Europe, right? Or they were peasants in Europe. And so they were sent over here on contract to get an opportunity to live their best life, right? They were indentured servants. Mm-hmm. One of the things, and we'll get into it as we go deeper into this, we have to understand the Bill of Rights. That the European, that was their code, right? When they came over here, they had a Bill of Rights, right? So they had to join the militia whether they wanted to or not, because they're occupying foreign land. And so who better to make your soldiers than your prisoners and your homeless, right? Let's get them out of Europe, right? Let's cleanse our country, and let's send that problem over to North America.
Correct. Great point. And just to make sure it kind of sticks, this picture here speaks a lot, because we know the current outline of Georgia, but as we can see, this Georgia prior to that encompassed Alabama as well as Mississippi, and we know those three states in itself was one of the most horrific towards prisoners of war throughout history, as far as hangings, lynchings, and that. So it kind of just connects to, okay, they're sending their worst of the worst from their prisons in England to this area, and they are in turn doing egregious hostile acts towards prisoners of war. So just kind of makes that connection.
Culture just
Culture.
stuck, basically.
and you can actually, hold on, great points by all of you. Hold on, am I going? Let me do this. If we're talking about military execution, so like Chief Biko just said, look at the land that they were originally classifying as the estate of King George, right? Or Georgia. And we can see that as the Yamasee Wars ended, they didn't want these people to go further south, right? Because further south, now you're getting into Seminole territory, right? Which is a whole nother nation. And that nation comprised of Florida all the way over into Louisiana area. So what we can see and what we're going to learn as we read these different documents is everybody who was north of what we now know as Georgia, they're going to be forced west of, this is the Mississippi River. They're going to be forced west of the Mississippi River. So we can see militarily, the Europeans strategically had a cutoff zone, right? Everybody from the Carolinas and Tennessee, Virginia area, all the way coming up Pennsylvania, all of that. You can't run, you can't go south. They want you west. And we're going to see how this all ties together as we continue to do our work. So we have hit the 8 o'clock mark. We do 1 hour meetings a week on Sunday. Does anybody want to, I'll just go through a couple more of these pictures while everybody else closes out. Just if you want to see what the inside of a big house really looked like in the oldest city in the estate known as Georgia, Savannah. I'll go through these while Chief Biko and Chief Quietwater can make their closing comments.
Yeah, this was a good class. Just going back to learning the very basics of where we descended from. I think it's just very important to have that foundation that we can just build on each week to learn more and more and more about why, how we got to be prisoners of war. And this is just the first, the first step is to acknowledge it, basically.
Chief Biko?
Great point, great point. Just to answer a question from Chief Quietwater earlier about North Carolina, it was established November 21st, 1789.
Okay.
So definitely well over 100 years after the founding of the Carolinas. But in general, this is pretty much the foundation of where this class is going to take us all. Just understanding our current predicament, understanding who we are as far as not being classified as any color, anything that is not associated with a nation, because that's the first step. We have to make sure that we connect ourselves to an actual nation. That way we can start actually coming to the table with things that we want, whether it be reparations or anything outside of that. But this is definitely the first step, and everybody should take these first 3 steps of knowing, where their lineage is on this land. That way it connects us to this land. That way we can have some pride in actually taking back this land.
Let me ask y'all one question. Both of y'all mentioned prisoner of war. In closing, what made you, Chief Biko, come to the conclusion that you are a prisoner of war? Because that's different language, and if somebody hears this video, they're gonna think, well, why would he use that term?
Correct. Pretty much what we've been pretty much reiterating this past hour is that we had our own nations. We had our own Confederacy. So we had our own government, we had our own structure. And if somebody, just think of it as us going to Japan in World War II and, establishing our military or setting up military on that land, they are pretty much military occupied. So if we think of that same concept in this term, as we had our own nations, Europeans coming over here, establishing their own colonies and setting up their own military here on this land, we can think of it as the same thing. And thus, when we are captured, we are then prisoners of war. So instead of, and I think that's a great distinction between, that and slavery, because you can be put into slavery through a prisoner of war, but nobody is a slave. A slave is something that you're put into slavery.
Right.
So understanding that we are a nation, and that we are currently being military occupied is something that may not stick in this first week or first video, but when we continue to reiterate it, it will definitely stick, and you'll understand why we use that term.
Chief Quietwater, why would you use the term prisoner of war?
The same reason as Chief Biko, the fact that we had everything going for ourselves, and then they come and they occupied the land that we were native to, and pretty much the rest is history. So I think that with people understanding that basic information, then they will be able to understand more and more and more of the position that we actually are living in today, basically.
Okay.
Correct.
And in closing, I agree as well. Prisoner of war, like Chief Biko said, nobody is a slave as far as American history is concerned. We hear the narrative that Native American nations had slaves as well. We have to put it in historical context. Prisoners of war was common in war. If one nation defeated another nation, those men were going to be prisoners of war. If you surrendered and did not die on the battlefield, you would become a prisoner of war. And what would happen is, they would treat you a certain type of way. They also talk about booty and prize. That those are the spoils of war. That's going to be the women, the children, and the land. That's the booty. That's the prize of war. And so when we understand what the European has done is he's been able to occupy North America pretty much peacefully, because the Americans that are reclassified as Black, Negro, colored, Afro-American, we're unaware that we're prisoners of war.
Right.
Through their school system, right?
Right.
They tell us this slave narrative when in reality, no, we're prisoners of war.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And more specifically, because the Third Seminole War never ended, which was the collapse of the Creek Confederacy, and we're going to read the treaties, and we're going to walk it through 1 week at a time, and it's going to be an enlightening experience. I will read the 12 steps next week with legal definitions. Who wants to do the inventor?
I can go ahead and do the inventor.
And would you do the maroon points, Chief Whitewater?
Yep, I sure will.
All right, so this is week 1 in the books. This is a 13-week fiscal program of action. Lastly, one last thing. Where are y'all at with, if you look at the steps, you see we talk about stop spending your money and stop supporting these other groups. If all of y'all could just speak on that real quick in this introductory video, because everybody wants to know, well, yeah, it's one thing to learn about your history, but what are we going to do about it? What we do about it is stop participating in it, right? If we're prisoners of war, let's stop participating in our imprisonment and our benign neglect. Chief Quietwater, where are you at with that? As far as
I don't have a problem with, I do my best to support our establishment and businesses when I can, and when it's feasible for me to do so. So that's not an issue for me to not support, the European establishment and businesses.
what about
If
the
I can help
boycott
it.
part of it?
I'm sorry.
What about the boycott side of it? As far as our offense would be defense first as prisoners of war, meaning stop supporting.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't have a problem with that at all.
What would be the benefit? Do you see a benefit from that?
It will, if we do it massively, I mean, we have to start somewhere. It would redirect to us, because we are the biggest consumers. So I think that it would help us in the long run as natives.
Chief Biko, what's your thought on the defense being your offense first? Basically, sit down, educate yourself, learn who you are, and stop supporting all these fictitious systems.
It's needed. It's needed. We've seen from our ancestors, they were able to do it for over a year, well over a year, as far as the bus boycotts. And we see how that created change. They was able to get voting rights. So we have a blueprint of that. It works. We have to be consistent with that work, and then we'll reap the benefits from it. Us three here are sitting on this Zoom creating a video on one of their biggest holidays, July 4th. So that in itself should, entail our mindset as far as us breaking away from the system, not trying to spend money with something that has nothing to do with us. This isn't our holiday.
Right.
This is the Europeans' independence from Europe. This isn't, we already had our government. We were already independent. So just, keeping that in mind and taking that mindset into each other holiday, as well as any business, will just become easier. And learning from these courses, this class, these videos will help just make that even more easier, and we'll be able to pool our money together and actually create change. We won't have to beg for it.
Great breakdown. You killed it.